Hello, everyone. I'm making this recording. We're going to go over a definition of anthropology in case this is your first anthropology course. And then we'll get started on defining some key terms like what magic, witchcraft, and religion is defined as within the discipline of anthropology for the purposes of this course. And then we'll go ahead and get into some examples. And then hopefully next week we'll jump into some examples of cultural relativism and dive into that topic a bit more in depth. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. If this is your first anthropology course, I just want to start out with a very simple definition of what anthropology is and the types of approaches used within our discipline. Anthropology is the study of people or humans, including things like their culture, languages, biology, prehistory, and human evolution. We also look at primates as well within biological anthropology, but for the purposes of this course, we'll be focusing on the cultural components of anthropology, as well as some incorporations when we're looking at archaeological evidence, so things like artifacts, human remains. And we'll also kind of dive into medical anthropology and forensic anthropology a little bit briefly when we get into some future topics in the course. And I'll make sure to introduce that when we get to it. But for the main portion of this course, we'll be focusing in on cultural anthropology, which is the study of different cultures and cultural traditions. This can mean, cultures usually in the modern day, but we also look at historical evidence and archaeological evidence to kind of build upon our knowledge of how cultures have changed over time. So just keep that in mind. Generally speaking, anthropology is a holistic discipline, which means we're looking at all these different components of what makes someone human. So, like their language, cultural traditions, the types of food that they eat, etc. And looking at all these different sums and compiling them together to get a more complete picture of what makes someone human, what kind of cultural traditions are practiced and kind of passed on, etc. So, with the holistic approach, the real takeaway is that we're looking at all these different types of evidence and all these different components of life as a human being in order to get a more complete picture of whatever research question you're looking at. So, for example, I did my research in Japan on gender and sexuality and the kind of exclusionary nature for non-normative gender identities and sexualities. So that would mean anyone falling under the non-binary category or the LGBTQIA plus generalization, as well as some other groups. So when I was looking at that, I would ask specific questions about both gender and sexuality to my research group, but also we're looking at things like how other components of their life are impacted. And when I'm doing field work, I'm not just looking at their gender expression, but also, how this impacts their lifestyle, who they get to hang out with or communicate with on a daily basis, etc. So you're looking at all these different components of life. So within the holistic approach, a lot of kind of the brief summary, I suppose, for this approach would be that you're looking for these human universals or these characteristics that can be found in all human societies. Things that you'll see with any group of humans that have been gathered in a specific area. So things like language. Language is a human universal. Or looking for things like signs or symbols within religious practices. These are things that all cultural groups will exhibit and things we analyze as anthropologists. So the goal then, a very simplified goal of anthropology, is to study this broad range of human beliefs and behaviors to kind of find out what it means to be human, and also to solve complex social and political issues within cultural groups, within religious groups, in order to make, uh, you know, educated deductions about our research questions. So, really, each ethnographic study, which is an anthropological study of a culture, will have different type of questions that you're asking based on the type of research that you're doing. So, for example, if you're studying, like I was, looking at gender and sexuality, I was really looking at quality of life and how unfair treatment of non normative gender identities and sexualities impacted your ability to kind of thrive in the world and make an analysis based off that point in a specific culture area. So, within any kind of study that we're looking at or case study in this course, you always need to keep in mind what the research questions are and what the goal of that research is. And for any course that you take, when you're reading any type of research or research article, it's important for you to understand what the researcher is asking, what they're looking for with that research, because that dictates their results in a lot of ways. If you're not asking certain questions, you won't have all the answers there for you. This isn't a fieldwork oriented course, but just keep in mind that the way that you do fieldwork and the way that you ask questions does heavily impact your results and your ability to convey those results. All right, so within anthropology, there are four main fields. So, like I said before, cultural anthropology will be the emphasis within this course because we're looking at magic, witchcraft, and religion through the lens of cultural anthropology. And this is the study of contemporary human societies. So, usually modern or current human societies. Then there's physical or biological anthropology, which is the study of human biology and evolution. This also includes our primates as well. So we're looking at primate adaptations, primate evolution, and also primate characteristics and behavior within the realm of biological anthropology as well. Archaeology is about studying and interpreting material remains recovered from earlier cultures. And there's also historical archaeology, which is usually the category given to the type of archaeology when you have written documentation in the recent time period. So if there's some type of historical documentation, writing, etc., within a recent time frame, but generally, with archaeology, you are interpreting and finding artifacts in order to make, again, we're answering specific research questions here. So if you're looking at gender and sexuality at a site in Texas, this is a project I worked on in the lab. We were looking at material remains from a brothel in Texas and looking at the ways that sexuality was expressed through artifacts, so through material culture, essentially, on that military base that we were looking at. So that would be one example of an archaeological case study. And then we have linguistic anthropology, which is the study of language, how languages evolve, how they change, the history of languages, etc. Within these four main fields, there are subfields. So I mentioned medical anthropology, forensic anthropology. So medical anthropology, we're really looking at the kind of healthcare system and medicine in a contemporary world. And this is a subfield of cultural anthropology. You're looking at medicine and how it is understood and how it's interpreted through different cultural lenses. So, how people understand medicine, illness, medical treatment, etc. Forensic anthropology, however, is looking at strictly those who have died, usually just osteological processes, so just human remains that are heavily decomposed. And often forensic anthropologists are brought in the cases of mass death, so things like natural disaster, for example, or they're brought in to analyze old human remains that might be considered as part of a crime, so they might collaborate with the police, or they're brought in to kind of analyze archaeological finds, so human remains, to kind of identify how that person died, maybe their age, gender, what diseases they might have had at the time of death, etc. So these are all different fields of anthropology. You might think this sounds like a lot of things. It's a very broad discipline. So when someone says they're an anthropologist, that can mean a lot of things. I personally am a cultural anthropologist, so I've done my research within the realm of studying culture, but I also have a background in archaeology and forensic anthropology, and have done field work in those areas. Um, so each anthropologist will have a different specialty and different training dependent on their educational background. All right. So, in terms of anthropological research methods, you've probably learned a bit about this in your reading, but participant observation is usually what people think of in terms of anthropological research. These are long term studies where you usually go and live and become a part of the community that you are studying. Um, a lot of anthropologists do study within their own culture groups now, so you don't necessarily have to go out somewhere far away to do field work or participant observation field work. Um, but you certainly can. Again, I did my field work in Akita, which is a region in Japan, and I lived and worked and spoke the language, learned everything about the community I was working with, and became integrated into that community. Ethnography is just a word that's defining what we do and what we write up as anthropologists. This is a descriptive study of human societies and cultures. And again, each ethnography is going to have a different research goal, a different topic, different culture area. Um, and this is just the kind of analysis and written description of everything that you worked on during your process of fieldwork. And then another key term we have is culture areas. These are geographic areas in which societies share cultural traits. These don't usually coincide with state or country borders. For example, a lot of times you'll hear things generalized, like in California, if you've been here a long time, a lot of people will be like, "Oh, that's something someone does in SoCal. We don't do that up here in the Valley." Things like that. These culture areas are breaking these borders that we have of the state and are broken down into smaller areas with shared cultural traits. So, whatever that might be. All right. So then, ethnographers are just people who study these human societies and write ethnographies. Usually, ethnographers are anthropologists. And then, when we use the term ethnographic present, we're talking about groups that exist today or have existed in the recent past, as they were first described by the ethnographers writing about them. We also tend to organize societies in terms of subsistence strategy, the way they make a living, language, etc. These kind of play into the type of cultural area definitions that we have. So, example, if we have a group of foragers who live next to a bunch of pastoralists, we would usually consider those different cultural groups or culture areas. All right, so culture is not a simply defined word in our discipline. but I want to give a really basic definition to get us started, and then we can talk more about it throughout the semester. So, a very famous anthropologist, Edward Tyler, wrote that culture is a complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, laws, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So essentially, he's saying here that culture is this complex and variable component of what it means to be human. It's something that we learn, and symbols are a huge component of culture. Without symbols, things don't have meanings. And symbols are defined as a shared understanding about the meanings of certain words, attributes, or objects. So this might sound kind of convoluted, but all this means is that we share this set of symbols to communicate with each other. A really simple way to think about this is when you see a red stop sign. The color red is being associated with stopping. We have red lights, red signs, etc. So this is the shared symbolic logic that we all have in this culture area, that a red light means stop. There's no need to explain this or really think about it for too long, but if you've been driving anywhere in the United States, you've associated this color with this action. That's symbolic logic. Another example might be language. Language is just a system of symbols, and we've assigned meaning to the words that we share with each other. And if we speak the same language, we're sharing the same symbolic language. All right, let's move on. So, in the field of anthropology, culture is a technical term. We're not referring to like the finer things in life or things being fancy by saying they're cultured. Instead, what we're referring to is a set of behaviors and beliefs within a specific culture group. And again, there's a ton of different definitions of culture. I gave a simple one a moment ago, but just keep in mind if you ever take a theory class, this is something you will learn more about. Or if you decide to major in anthropology, you'll learn more about how culture is defined and debates on how to define it more effectively within our discipline. So one of the consequences of the social transmission of culture is that human behavior is complex and variable, and also keep in mind that culture is not a stagnant concept. It is not this fixed thing that exists in the world. It's constantly being changed and added to and developed on based on, time passing, technological advances, linguistic differences and changes occurring over time. Culture is not a stagnant concept. So we talked briefly about symbols. Again, these are shared understandings about the meanings of words. Culture is then based on this use of symbols, and it is learned primarily through symbols. So language is a symbolic system. Colors, different signs and symbols, like on the street, for example, or the use of color to signify mourning or getting married. These are all different symbols or symbolic systems that we share as a culture, and we have agreed upon their meaning. So the idea of culture then involves much more than just describing human activity, but also include things like their beliefs and perceptions about beliefs, as well as how they understand the world, their place in the world, and their existence. Culture then gives meaning to our reality and to our existence, in that we're able to kind of define and talk about our role in the universe within this system of symbols that we have created. All right, some other key terms that we'll be talking about all semester and will continually come up are ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. So ethnocentrism is viewing other cultures from our inherently biased perspective, within our own culture. So basing or comparing everything off of your own cultural biases. So this idea that your culture is the only natural and correct one, and this can kind of result in viewing other cultures as inferior to your own or less than. So, for example, if in your culture area or cultural group, you see that it's taboo to eat pork, for example, as it is within my religious and cultural background, you then would find it kind of unethical to consume pork. So if anyone else did it, that would be considered unnatural and incorrect or sinful, depending on your religious background. And that is a very ethnocentric perspective to have. The idea is that you don't need to judge another cultural or religious group based off your own beliefs or cultural background, which is where we get to cultural relativism, which is the view that cultures have merits within their own historical, environmental context and should be understood within those contexts. So within that, we're understanding that these cultural differences are the result of geographic differences, historical, and social conditions. And the goal is to look at what people believe, why they do the things that they do, and not to evaluate whether you believe their beliefs are true or false. As anthropologists, we are not looking to say, your belief that eating pork is sinful is not true or false, etc. Instead, what we're looking at is evaluating the context of those beliefs, how those beliefs came about, what kind of historical, social, religious conditions arose for that restriction to come about. So when we're talking about cultural relativism in this course, what we're really meaning is to kind of take a step back and think about each cultural tradition and religious practice within its own kind of context, rather than evaluating it against your own beliefs and cultural biases. All right, so within that, we have this idea of Edic and emic perspectives. So an Edic perspective is having this outsider perspective and looking in on another culture. So you're kind of evaluating based off your existing biases as a researcher or from a specific religious or cultural background. The emic perspective is one that attempts to see the world through the eyes of people being studied, which is usually our goal as anthropologists, and this idea that you're evaluating that practice within the lens of that specific culture rather than evaluating it based on your own biases. All right. Enculturation then is the process through which you learn your culture and worldview. This is something that happens unconsciously, although it is learned. This is the process that occurs when you're growing up, when you're learning your language, when you're watching TV with your family, going to events with them, going to church, going to temple. This is a process of enculturation. You're learning and shaping who you are through these experiences. And during this time, we're taught what is normal, what's good, what's bad, and this shapes our specific cultural values and expectations. And these vary greatly depending on the way that you were raised. All right, I want to do a brief introduction of magic, witchcraft, and religion as well. So let's take a look at that as well before I let you guys go for the day. All right, let me just open up this PowerPoint, and both these PowerPoints will be available on Canvas on the week 1 module under PowerPoints and lecture. So the PowerPoints are available and this video. All right. Let's go ahead and define magic, witchcraft, and religion, and just get that going so that next week, when we talk about cannibalism and cultural relativism, we'll have a little bit more foundation for what magic, witchcraft, and religion are, what anthropology is, and kind of get the ball rolling there. All right, so when we talk about magic, witchcraft, and religion in anthropology and in this course, we're talking about very kind of specific definitions of these. Magic and witchcraft, especially, are used very commonly in pop culture to mean many different things. So I just want to clarify what we mean by magic and witchcraft in this course so that you can use that going forward. So first off, magic are the ways in which a person can compel the supernatural to behave in certain ways. So you're interacting with the supernatural world in some ways in order to get a result. So the goal is to interact with the supernatural to have an actual result, whether that's physical or psychological. When we talk about witchcraft, we're referring to the ability of a person to cause harm by the means of personal power that resides within the body of a witch. So this is referring to causing harm or changing another person through witchcraft. And then when we talk about religion, we're referring to the realm of culture that deals with the sacred supernatural. And I'll define sacred and supernatural for us today as well. So again, religion refers to that interaction with the supernatural world, and most of the time, both magic and witchcraft are considered components of religion. All right. So with magic, again, we're referring to methods to interact with the supernatural and the supernatural world to bring about particular outcomes. A good example of this would be like divination. You are taking part in a divining practice, such as casting lots or tarot, maybe, to get a particular outcome, whether that's to predict the future or to find a well or whatever it is you're trying to find. You are interacting with the supernatural world in order to get that result. And through magic, the goal is to compel the supernatural to do what you want to do. So if you do this correct formula, then you should be able to convince the supernatural entities or supernatural creatures to do what you ask them to do. That's generally the goal of magical practices. Magic can be used for the public good, but there are also dark practitioners, which are referred to as sorcerers, who deal with antisocial matters, so causing harm to another person or inflicting pain or death. That's considered something darker that sorcerers would be involved in. So again, today most anthropologists consider magic to be part of religion because you're associating it with the supernatural mechanisms and belief. This, however, is dependent on how you define religion, which is very complicated. I'll define religion for our course in this slide, but just keep in mind that religion has many definitions, like we were talking about with culture. If you get into the theoretical components of anthropology, you'll learn more about that. But for the purposes of this course, magic and witchcraft are both considered part of religion and due to their involvement with the supernatural world and belief. So a component of this then would be superstitions. So this is a belief that is not based in reason or knowledge. So something you believe without having any type of evidence or scientific knowledge of. So it can be an irrational fear of something, like stepping on a crack and that causing harm to somebody. That's an irrational fear that doesn't have any scientific backing. These superstitions can be in connection with religion. So, for example, not making the sign of the cross, causing bad luck or harm. So it could be belief in something that's not quote unquote real or scientifically provable. Some common superstitions, things like walking under ladders. There's lots of sports superstitions, so like having lucky goggles or other items, a lucky jersey, having pregame rituals, like you have to do a certain cheer a certain number of times before you play your game, otherwise you guys will lose. These are all examples of superstitions that don't have any scientific backing, but are commonly practiced in order to get a proposed outcome, some type of success, or just avoided in order to not have bad luck or have harm come upon you. Um, so superstitions and magic often, work together in that if you have a belief in magic and magical practices, a lot of times there are superstitions that come along with that. And even if you don't have any religious beliefs at all, you might still have superstitions. Again, a lot of sports superstitions are, you know, not about your religious beliefs, but are about this concept of good and bad luck, which ties into the realm of magic and magical practices. So even if you are not religious, you're an atheist, you still might have a belief in magical practices if you believe in these types of superstitions. All right, let's get into a basic definition of religion, and then we'll end there and pick up in class on Monday. So, our religion can most simply be described as a system of beliefs and behaviors that is based on a system of symbols. So, again, we're looking at different beliefs, how you kind of came to be in the world, what humans mean in society, what gods there are. Those are all core components of beliefs. And then behaviors connected with the supernatural world. So whether it's things like prayings or different type of rituals, attending different services, these are all tied into a system of belief. There are many different ways of understanding and defining religions. Again, we're not going to get into this heavily today. There are analytic definitions, which focus on how religion is expressed in a culture. There's functional definitions, which focus on religion's impact on the social realm and the psychological realm. And then the essentialist definition, which is looking at the essential nature of religion. So, religion as this domain of the extraordinary. And these are things you'll see elaborated on more deeply in this PowerPoint. We're not going to go over it all today for the sake of time, but we will go over that next week. Lastly, some key terms to note from this PowerPoint. Supernatural just means above the natural. So anything that is unnatural or above nature itself. So something that can't be explained with scientific knowledge. So like any belief in gods, spirits, superstitions, magic, witchcraft, cryptids, etc. Those would all be supernatural things. For sacred terms, what we mean is an attitude of reverence or respect is applied to the subject, and it's not secular. So sacred objects are tied up in a system of beliefs, usually, and are referring to specific objects that are usually connected in some way to a supernatural element or entity. And then lastly, animism, which you'll see used in a lot of anthropological writing, is just referring to a belief in spirit beings. Right. All right, again, we're not going to go over these approaches today. We're going to go over them next week. All right, cool. So that